In the quiet corridors of power in Moscow, a decision has been made that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. Imagine, for a moment, what it must feel like to be a veteran Russian tank commander, a man who has spent 20 years mastering the lethal precision of a T-90, who knows every bolt and every firing solution by heart, now watching his soldiers climb onto thin-framed motorcycles or walk exposed across open fields, while the very tanks they were trained to lead sit idle, parked safely 20 kilometers behind the front lines. This is not speculation. This is the daily reality unfolding inside Putin's army in the spring of 2026. Let that image settle with you. For generations, the world has understood exactly what a tank unit is supposed to be. The name itself told the story. These were the armored formations designed to deliver overwhelming firepower and protection, the steel fist that could break through enemy lines while shielding the infantry behind them. Russia, perhaps more than any other nation on Earth, had staked its military identity on this very idea, from the massive parades on Red Square to Putin's own repeated declarations that the T-90 was among the finest main battle tanks the world had ever seen. We watched those parades. We studied the columns rolling across the training grounds. And for the first 2 years of this war, many serious analysts still spoke of Russian armored superiority as though it were an unchangeable fact of modern conflict. But something profound has shifted. Russian commanders now face a threat more dangerous than the Ukrainian army itself, the reality of a battlefield that has rendered their most prized assets almost obsolete. And in response, they have made a calculated, ruthless choice, one that prioritizes the survival of expensive machines over the lives of the highly trained soldiers who were meant to operate them. Stay with us, because this single decision is far more than a tactical adjustment. It is the first visible fracture in a once mighty military doctrine that is now being forced to consume itself from within. And by the time we finish this story, you will understand exactly why even loyal Russian soldiers are now calling it a crime. And the clearest window into this new reality comes not from speculation, but from the measured words of a Ukrainian commander who has watched it unfold day after day. Viktor Trehubov, spokesman for Ukraine's joint forces, put it plainly in mid-April. Russian commanders have begun parking their tanks as far as 20 kilometers, 12.4 miles behind the actual fighting. Let that distance settle with you for a moment. 20 kilometers. In the age of modern drones, that is not a safety buffer, it is a confession. Such is the lethal nature of today's battlefield, Trehubov explained. That equipment, especially tanks and infantry fighting vehicles, simply does not survive the journey through what has become a 20-kilometer kill zone. The threat is not abstract. It is constant, invisible until the final second, and devastatingly efficient. Ukrainian FPV drones, working in coordinated swarms with high-altitude reconnaissance, have turned the approach to the front into a corridor where survival for heavy armor is now measured in minutes rather than miles. So the calculation inside Russian command changed. Instead of risking the loss of high-value tanks that cost millions to replace, they made the colder, more pragmatic choice. Keep the armor safe in the rear and send the soldiers forward anyway. Picture what this looks like on the ground. The men who once trained for years to operate the T-90, a main battle tank whose 125mm smoothbore gun, advanced fire control system, and onboard infrared sensors allow it to engage targets up to 8 kilometers away, are no longer riding inside that steel protection. They are now moving on unarmored motorcycles, quad bikes, or simply on foot. Vehicles that offer speed but zero defense. One misstep on rough terrain, one moment of exposure, and a Ukrainian drone can descend from the sky and end the mission in fire and shrapnel. Even the T-90 itself, the pride of the Russian armored forces that Putin himself has praised as among the best in the world, becomes almost useless when parked at that distance. 8 kilometers of effective range simply does not reach the front when the tanks are held 20 kilometers back. The machines sit idle, their sophisticated targeting systems staring at empty fields, while the soldiers they were meant to support are left exposed in the kill zone. These individual voices are beginning to paint a much larger picture, one measured not just in human lives lost, but in the staggering scale of the losses Russia is now sustaining across the entire front. What we are witnessing is the moment when doctrine collides with reality, and reality is winning. And the human cost of that collision is only now starting to come into full view. And what makes this revelation cut even deeper is that it is not coming solely from Ukrainian commanders observing the battlefield from the other side. It is coming from inside the Russian military itself, from a soldier who still believes in defending his homeland, but can no longer remain silent about the reality his unit is facing. On April 14th, a letter appeared on the Telegram channel of Voinkor Kotenok, one of the most prominent Russian military bloggers, a voice that has consistently supported Putin's war effort since the very first day of the invasion. Kotenok is precisely the kind of figure the Kremlin has relied upon to shape the official narrative, a propagandist who usually delivers the message Moscow wants the world and its own citizens to hear. Yet, on that day, even he chose to publish a letter from an anonymous soldier, serving in the tank battalion of the 110th Brigade of the Russian Armed Forces. The soldier did not hold back. Basically, tanks are now hardly taking part in direct combat, he wrote, and so every 2 or 3 weeks, 2 men from each company in the battalion are drafted into the infantry and sent to assault positions, to fortified positions, to support UAVs. He explained that the 3 platoons a tank company is supposed to have exist only on paper. Many of the members have already been lost to Ukrainian drones. Those who remain know they are next. Then came the words that carry the full moral weight of his anguish. People are ready to go into battle and defend their homeland. But I consider it a crime to dispose of the lives of tankers like this. After all, tankers are not infantry. He called the practice tyranny. He called it destruction. He even went so far as to label it an illegal practice. And to make the human cost unmistakable, he listed the names of 11 tankers he knew personally, men he had trained with, lived beside, fought alongside, who had been killed or gone missing after being thrown into assault units as ordinary foot soldiers. Let that sink in for a moment. 11 names from one single tank battalion in just a matter of weeks. Written not by an opponent, but by a Russian soldier who still wants to believe in the mission, yet feels compelled to call what is happening to his comrades a crime. This is the kind of internal fracture that no amount of official messaging can fully conceal. Stay with us, because these individual voices are beginning to paint a much larger picture, one measured not just in human lives lost, but in the staggering scale of the losses Russia is now sustaining across the entire front. Those 11 names from a single tank battalion are not an isolated tragedy. They are the visible tip of something far larger, a scale of loss that is now being measured not in isolated incidents, but in staggering monthly totals that reveal the true human cost of this new Russian doctrine. According to Ukraine's Ministry of Defense, the month of March 2026 alone recorded more than 35,300 confirmed enemy losses. Let that number sink in for a moment. 35,300, the highest single-month tally since Ukraine's internal E-Points scoring system was first implemented to track and incentivize drone operators across the front. The vast majority of those losses, the ministry states, came from strikes carried out by unmanned aerial vehicles, the very drone swarms that Russian commanders are now desperately trying to avoid by keeping their tanks parked safely in the rear. To put the scale into sharper perspective, Ukraine has invested approximately $880 million in building what they call their drone wall, a layered network of reconnaissance platforms, FPV, strike teams, and electronic warfare systems designed to turn the entire approach to the battlefield into a lethal corridor. That investment is paying dividends measured in Russian lives. And here is the cruel irony that makes this moment in the war so revealing. Russia itself is making the task easier for that drone wall. By stripping the armor from its own tank units, by forcing highly trained specialists to advance on foot or on thin, unarmored motorcycles and quad bikes, Moscow has handed Ukraine's operators exactly the kind of soft, exposed targets that FPV drones were built to destroy with clinical efficiency. These are not fresh conscripts rushed into battle with minimal training. These are career tankers, men who spent years mastering complex armored tactics, now reduced to the most vulnerable form of infantry imaginable. One slip on uneven ground, one moment caught in the open, and the sky delivers its verdict. The numbers, the letters from the front, and the visible shift in Russian tactics all point to the same conclusion. What began as a fear-driven tactical adjustment has become a self-reinforcing cycle of attrition, and that cycle is accelerating. Stay with us as the picture becomes even clearer. Understanding the scale of this carnage is only the first step. The deeper question, the one that explains why this is happening at all, lies in the nature of the battlefield itself. Those staggering numbers and the raw testimony from the front lines all lead us to the central question: why is this happening at all? Why would Russian commanders deliberately strip the armor from their own tank units and send highly trained specialists forward as unprotected infantry? Viktor Trehubov laid it out with clinical clarity. Russian commanders still want to fight the way they planned to fight back in 2022, using massed armored columns to punch through defenses and seize ground under the protection of heavy steel. They would prefer that world. But the war of 2026 has moved far beyond anything those tactics can handle. The reason is fear. A very specific, very rational fear. Across the entire front, Ukraine has spent years constructing what have become some of the most sophisticated kill zones in modern military history. These are not simple lines of trenches or scattered minefields. They are layered, intelligent systems stretching 20 kilometers deep, precisely the distance Russian tanks are now being held back. Inside these corridors lie dense minefields capable of shredding tracks in seconds, dragon's teeth obstacles that channel vehicles into predictable kill pockets, and anti-tank ditches designed to trap and immobilize even the heaviest armor. But the true lethality comes from what sits above and beyond those traditional defenses. High-altitude reconnaissance drones maintain constant overwatch, feeding real-time coordinates to swarms of FPV strike drones below. The moment a vehicle slows, stalls, or attempts to maneuver around an obstacle, the signal is sent. In many sectors, those FPV drones find their mark more than 80% of the time. Single-soldier fighting positions, deliberately dispersed to survive artillery, allow Ukrainian forces to maintain coverage across vast areas while minimizing their own exposure. Ukraine has learned from every previous attempt by Russian armor to break through. Each layer has been refined, deepened, and integrated with new technology. The result is a corridor that turns any attempt at mechanized advance into a slow, expensive, and almost certain death sentence. Let that reality settle for a moment. Russian commanders are not cowards. They understand that sending a T-90 or T-72 into these zones today is not bravery. It is simply feeding expensive equipment to a system that has been purpose-built to destroy it. So they made the only calculation that still made sense to them. Keep the tanks alive in the rear. Protect the asset. Send the men anyway. This fear-driven choice carries a certain twisted logic, one that we will see play out in painful detail in the very next Russian assault that tried to defy these kill zones. And when we examine what happened there, the full human price of this decision becomes impossible to ignore. To truly grasp the depth of this fear, one must look more closely at the anatomy of these kill zones themselves. Ukraine has not built simple defensive lines. It has engineered dynamic, layered systems that combine traditional obstacles with the lethal precision of modern drone warfare. Minefields slow vehicles and force them into predictable paths. Dragon's teeth and anti-tank ditches channel them further, turning every advance into a slow-motion gauntlet. High-altitude reconnaissance drones hover far above, watching every movement with unblinking eyes. The moment a target is fixed, whether a tank bogged down in mud or a column attempting to bypass an obstacle, the signal goes out. Swarms of FPV drones descend. In many sectors, those drones achieve over 80% accuracy. Even single-soldier fighting positions, deliberately dispersed across the depth of the zone, allow Ukrainian forces to maintain coverage while remaining difficult to suppress with artillery. The entire system is designed not merely to stop an advance, but to make it prohibitively expensive in both equipment and lives. And yet, on rare occasions, Russian commanders still test this system. On March 8th, a small mechanized column attempted to break through toward the frontline town of Huliepol. It was not a massive assault by design. The column consisted of a single tank, one armored fighting vehicle, and a pair of all-terrain vehicles. Perhaps Russian planners hoped that a smaller, faster force might slip through the gaps. It did not. Ukraine's 225th Air Assault Regiment tracked the column from the moment it entered the kill zone. Reconnaissance drones followed its every move. Then the FPV strikes began. The soldiers riding atop the vehicles were seen in their final moments, desperately scrambling for any cover they could find as the drones descended. None of the armored vehicles survived. The infantry fared no better. This single, relatively small engagement perfectly illustrates the brutal mathematics now governing the battlefield. Even when Russia attempts to use its tanks, the kill zones extract a price so high that commanders increasingly conclude the risk is no longer worth the reward. Let that calculation settle with you. Russia is not abandoning armored warfare out of incompetence. It is abandoning it because the system Ukraine has built has made traditional mechanized assaults almost suicidal. The tanks stay back. The men keep moving forward. This is where the story takes its most revealing turn. The fear is only half the story. The other half, equally cold and equally decisive, is a material reality that Russia can no longer ignore. It is running out of tanks to lose. This fear is only half the equation. The other half is a material reality that Russia can no longer hide or wish away. It is simply running out of tanks. According to Ukraine's Ministry of Defense, as of the 16th of April, 2026, Russia has lost 11,866 tanks, destroyed, captured, or abandoned since the full-scale invasion began. Let that number sink in for a moment. 11,866. Even when we look only at losses visually confirmed through photographs and video evidence by independent analysts, the figure still exceeds 4,000 more tanks than most countries have ever owned in their entire histories. For context, the United States maintains a total tank inventory of roughly 4,666 vehicles, placing it fourth in the world. Every nation ranked below the US possesses fewer than 4,000. Russia has now lost, in confirmed numbers alone, more armor than the entire active fleets of nearly every other major military power combined. And the losses continue to outpace replacement at a pace that should alarm even the most optimistic planners in Moscow. Russia is attempting to rebuild. It has stood up a second factory in an effort to reach an annual production target of 428 tanks per year. But even this optimistic goal falls catastrophically short when measured against the rate of destruction. Much of what Russia now calls new production is not new at all. It is older hulls, pulled from long-term storage, stripped for parts, and refurbished into vehicles that carry the scars of decades in reserve. The Desperation has reached the point where ancient Cold War relics are being dragged back into service. T-55 tanks, some dating back to the late 1950s, well over half a century old, are now being fitted with crude cope cages in a last-ditch attempt to survive drone strikes. These rusting machines, which should have been decommissioned decades ago, are expected to operate in a battlefield where Ukrainian FPV drones have already proven they can destroy far more advanced armor with clinical efficiency. This is no longer a question of tactics alone. It is a question of industrial and logistical exhaustion. Russia is cannibalizing its own strategic reserves to keep the appearance of an armored force alive, while simultaneously stripping the armor from the very soldiers trained to operate those machines. This shortage crisis reveals the second, equally decisive reason behind the decision we have been examining. And it sets up the most revealing contrast of the entire war between a Russian military forced to improvise its way toward exhaustion and a Ukrainian force that has chosen a very different path of adaptation and ingenuity. While Russia is forced to cannibalize its own doctrine and its own reserves, Ukraine has chosen a very different path, one defined not by desperation, but by ingenuity and adaptation. Ukraine possesses tanks as well. Yet rather than sending them blindly into the same lethal kill zones that have paralyzed Russian armor, Ukrainian forces have reimagined the role these vehicles can play in a drone-dominated battlefield. The Leopard 1, 5 tanks, in particular, have been quietly converted into makeshift mobile artillery platforms. Instead of driving them through 20 kilometers of layered death, Ukrainian crews position these tanks well behind the front lines, where they can deliver indirect fire out to 12 kilometers and potentially 18 kilometers with upgraded turrets before displacing to a new location. The old challenge of exposing heavy armor to FPV swarms simply disappears. These Leopards are equipped with electronic warfare defenses and drone countermeasures. They fire, they move, they survive. The crews remain protected. The mission continues without feeding expensive machines to the very system designed to destroy them. Let that contrast settle with you for a moment. On one side, Russia keeps its most advanced tanks parked safely 20 kilometers back, while sending its highly trained tankers forward on motorcycles and on foot, treating specialists as cheap infantry in a war of attrition. On the other side, Ukraine looks at the same problem, the lethal dominance of drones, and redesigns the tool to fit the new reality rather than forcing the battlefield to accept the old one. This is not merely a difference in resources, it is a difference in mindset. Russia is improvising its way toward exhaustion, sacrificing human lives to preserve machines it can no longer easily replace. Ukraine is adapting its machines to preserve human lives and maintain operational effectiveness. And while these converted Leopards conduct their indirect fire missions with clinical precision, Ukraine continues to demonstrate that it can still achieve tank-on-tank kills when the opportunity arises, a record that has been broken more than once in this conflict by creative, adaptive thinking rather than brute force. This single comparison reveals more about the trajectory of the war than any single battle statistic ever could. And so we return, full circle, to the image with which we began. Russian tankers, men who once trained for years inside the most sophisticated armored vehicles their nation could produce, now ride exposed motorcycles or march on foot across open ground, while the tanks they were meant to command sit parked 20 kilometers behind the front lines, silent and unused. Let that image settle with you one last time. What we have witnessed is not simply a tactical adjustment or a temporary shortage. It is the slow, deliberate unmaking of an entire military concept that Russia once believed would guarantee victory in this war. The armored fist that was supposed to punch through Ukrainian defenses in 2022 has been forced to unclench. The doctrine that defined the Russian army for generations, massed mechanized assaults protected by heavy steel, has met a battlefield that no longer rewards it. In its place stands something far more fragile, a force that is now cannibalizing its own specialists, its own reserves, and ultimately its own future to keep fighting. The strategic consequences stretch far beyond the current front lines. Every tank lost cannot be easily replaced. Every tanker killed represents years of institutional knowledge erased. Every public letter from loyal soldiers calling the practice a crime chips away at the narrative of inevitable Russian victory that the Kremlin has worked so hard to maintain. Geopolitically, this marks a profound shift. One of the world's largest armored powers has been forced to admit through its actions, if not its words, that the age of traditional tank warfare, as it understood, it is ending on the fields of Ukraine. And yet the war continues. Territory must still be claimed. Pride must still be preserved. The alternative, admitting that the old way of war is over, remains politically unacceptable in Moscow. But history rarely cares about political convenience. Historians looking back on this conflict may well point to this exact moment, the moment Russia began sending its tankers into battle without tanks, as the beginning of the end of an era. Not because the tanks themselves were all destroyed, but because the idea behind them finally died on the fields of Ukraine. This is the deeper revelation the numbers, the letters, and the battlefield itself have been trying to tell us all along. Stay with us, because the story is far from over. The next chapter of this war and what it means for the future of warfare itself may prove even more revealing than this one. This has been The Rampart. We'll see you in the next one.